Hello and welcome to the Interpreting Wine Hospitality Podcast with me, your host and podcast founder, Lawrence Francis. Welcoming you to this series celebrating the category of sherry. Released during Sherry Week 2019, this series will transport you to the region via conversations with Señor Beltrán Domecq of the Consejo Regulador and winemakers and owners of several bodega houses in the region. Sharing this information in podcast format, a first for the region. These 9 episodes will bust some myths about sherry that still exist in the marketplace and educate and attract a whole new audience of sherry drinker. So without further ado, here's today's episode of the series. Today's episode of the Sherry Week special features Jan Pettersen of Fernando de Castilla. This bodega is certainly bucking the trend in the marketplace, commanding premium prices for its sherries, and Jan offers much insight into this. Jan tells us his origin story and transition to the region. He talks food and wine pairings and the Copa Jerez, Fernando de Castilla production processes and a sense of place, global markets, finding consumers and premium pricing, the ultra-premium Fernando de Castilla Singular, its production and marketing, digital communication, and a look ahead for the sherry category. Enjoy.
Well, I'm a little bit of a sort of, different kind of personality in Jerez because I was not born here. I was born in Norway and came to Jerez in 1983 after having studied in Spain. Since I was very young, I had an interest in sort of the food and wine industry. And I actually started, sort of to work when I was in high school in a very fine store in Oslo, similar to Fortnum & Mason's, and that was so like Saturdays and school holidays, and there I picked up an interest in this, and my parents moved to Spain in the 1970s, and I went to university in the UK, and then I took a master in business administration in Barcelona, and then joined Osborne. So I joined this very big company in 1983, first as sort of export manager for Scandinavia, and then took on other responsibilities within the group and ended up being on the executive board of the group and in charge of many of the subsidiaries. And but during my time at Osborne, I really developed a very big interest in the historical products of this area, which is basically sherry and brandy de Jerez and sherry vinegar as well. So I thought these products are absolutely unique in the world, and they deserve more attention than the big companies were giving these categories at the time. So I think at the time, 20 years ago, I was already known in the industry as a sort of a sherry romantic. I love this product, and I really want to help bring these fine wines into the new generations. And I had the opportunity to purchase Bodega Rey Fernando de Castilla, and we reached an agreement at the end of 1999 with the previous owners. And my job at the time was to take the brand Fernando de Castilla, which was only known in Spain, take it to further afield into other markets, and I think we have been fairly successful. At the moment we export about 85% of our production to more than 40 countries around the world, and today, especially at the quality end of the market, we are a very relevant brand because we've never cut corners, we never sort of wanted to go down market, which was what many of the big companies did back in the 70s. Even late 60s, 70s, 80s was a bad time for sherry because people were trying to sell millions of bottles at any price, any style. A lot of, fairly poor wines were sold at very low prices in places like Germany, the UK, Holland. And we never wanted to be part of that. We genuinely believe that, good sherry is one of the greatest food wines in the world as well. And, our forefathers in the industry, they managed to establish sherry as one of the finest, if not the finest and most exclusive wine in the world. And at the time, people were drinking really good sherry with fine food. And the idea of sherry as an aperitif, consumed by old ladies in Britain or in Northern Europe, that was not the right way to go, I think. So we've never taken that route. We always talk about sherry and food. We only produce, good finos, amontillados, olorosos, Palo Cortado, Pedro Jiménez, Moscatel. The type of wines that made sherry so prestigious in the past. And I think that's the way to go. Go back, see, what type of wines were popular going back several generations, and try to make sherry relevant in a food context again. The Copa Jerez, is a little bit, it's a thing we started maybe 10 years ago, where we actively want to promote the idea of good sherry with good food, and I think we got we had a good moment when Spanish restaurants turned into be, Spanish cuisine, maybe one of the most exciting kitchens in the world. And we had Spanish restaurants as the best restaurants in the world. Places like El Bulli, Can Roca, and other restaurants have been among the finest restaurants in the world, with a very imaginative kitchen. With sort of a modern version of the tapas cuisine, where you don't get your starter, your fish, your meat, your cheese, and your dessert, but you get to eat a lot of different things with new techniques and new combinations of ingredients. And this sometimes calls for different wines, and I think we saw that at this sort of 3-star Michelin level, we got a lot of interest from these restaurants, and shortly afterwards, not only in Spain but other countries in the world, other 3-star and 2-star chefs around the globe suddenly found that good sherry was very good with this sort of new concept of fine dining, and that has sort of trickled down. People in other, it has inspired other young chefs and sommeliers. And if they see that, the top restaurants in the world are very interested in sherry, they get interested as well. And sort of parallel to that, we've seen the boom in the tapas concept, the Spanish tapas. And you have, even Michelin star tapas restaurants in places like London, where sherry has always been one of the main wines on the list. And strangely enough, we experienced that, people at that type of establishments, they tend to look for, sherry houses with a Spanish heritage. Not the same brands that, maybe were extremely active marketing-wise and promotion-wise, going back a generation, selling fairly inexpensive sherry as positioned as an aperitif. They are not getting the same attention as brands like Fernando de Castilla and several others. And it's very nice to see that the last 5 years we probably have had about 10 new small bodegas owned by people from the area and focusing on quality sherry. So in a way, people around the world are starting to see sherry as a Spanish wine, and or as a sort of archetypical Andalusian tapas wine in a way. But we find it easier today to sell sherry with a strange name like Fernando de Castilla than it would be if you had a sort of a very Anglo-sounding name. That's my impression, and I think younger consumers are now looking at sherry as something very Spanish and something extremely food friendly. Right?
Hearing you talk about the links between sherry and the links between Fernando de Castilla and cuisine, this is why I'm here. I'm here for, looking at the Copa Jerez and looking at the creativity around that. Something that I hear so much on the still wine side of things, and among the sommelier community in London, is around terroir, is around wines kind of translating a sense of place. And I think sherry wine, it can't be made anywhere else in the world. I mean, you couldn't really get much more location specific than that. I'm curious just to ask you to talk a little bit about what does Fernando de Castilla bring, in terms of its offering, that within that category of sherry that is again unique from whoever else may be making sherry in the region.
Well, I think to make good wine in Jerez or anywhere else on the planet, you need good fruit, and you need to do everything in your anything you can to avoid damaging the grapes. And the way we are set up is that we have a partner in the business that owns vineyards in the very best part of the sherry district on Albariza soil in the Pago Balbaina. We harvest everything by hand at the vineyard. There's a pressing plant with 2 pneumatic presses and temperature-controlled fermentation. So we harvest according to the capacity of the pressing plant, and the wines are fermented in the vineyard, and importantly as well, the sobre tabla, the first year of aging of the wines, where we separate the first pressing of the grapes, we fortify to 15% alcohol and leave it to grow floor yeast, the top yeast that settles on top of the wine, and the second pressing used for Oloroso, 45 to 18%. Those sobre tabla barrels are also located in a cellar in the vineyard. So when the wines are young, fragile, or the musts or the grapes are not transported in extreme heat from one place to the other, but it all takes place in one location, which I think is very important. And secondly, I think the greatest wines in Jerez are aged in Solera systems in traditional cellars. In the case of Fernando de Castilla, we have two sort of areas. One is a cellar dating back to the 18th century, with thick stone walls, adobe floors, good ventilation, good orientation towards the Atlantic coast, and the second part of our cellars, the other location, is our cellars built in 1870, which is actually where we are sitting at the moment. Also, in traditional construction with the, adobe, the adobe construction, the albero floor, open windows. So that's very important as well. I don't think if you have your wines in an industrial estate outside the city, with prefabricated walls and corrugated iron roofs, I don't think you get the same result. That's at least our philosophy. It's impractical. I think Fernando de Castilla is probably the most centrally located cellar in Jerez. We're actually in the area where all the great bodegas were located 1 century ago. Most of our competitors have have relocated to the outskirts of town, but we have decided to remain here, and we only do the industrial part of our operations, the bottling and the warehousing of the finished goods. We do that in a modern facility outside the city. But the fruit, the respect for the fruit, the care when you make the wines, and a perfect location for the soleras, I think that gives us the means of creating very good sherries.
Something that I picked up really from your introduction and talking about the health of the company was that idea of exporting 85% of your production to 40 countries. To me that speaks of diversification, and you're not sort of at the mercy of any sort of political changes that may occur in one country or another. And I'm curious to then bring that right back to you as the head of the company and marketing. Like what is the way to keep people interested, keep them spending, keep them buying in what might be a completely different part of the world. It's a totally different country with a different cuisine and and different economic cycles. Yeah, I'm just how do you keep getting the kind of the message out there and keep getting the influence out there?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, this, because as you say, we export big part of our production to many different markets, and we have to look for pockets of potential consumers within those markets, even here in Spain, because our policy, we don't deal with multiples, we don't deal with supermarket chains, we don't deal with discounters. We have our brand is for the on-trade and for specialists, and the high quality sort of online wine companies, and so that's sort of our route to market, and we really see take countries like France and Italy. Sherry market is very small, and we do fairly well in those markets because we find those pockets of consumers, and we make the effort to go in there, talk to people, hosting tastings, events, wine pairing dinners. We bring chefs, sommeliers, journalists from different countries here, and we really want to get in contact with the consumer or the consumer groups. So we spend a lot of time on events together with our importers, distributors, with the sort of the marketing and promotional people of those companies, and it's hard work, and it's probably a high expenditure per impact on the consumer. But I think we've had this strategy since I started here, and it sort of seemed to work. We're growing, not on a sort of massive scale, but the company is growing. We find that we are one of the companies that actually have the possibility of selling sherry at very high prices, which some other brands might really struggle to do. We, as an example, we launched 2 new wines under a sort of new family of wines from Fernando de Castilla called the Singular, which is one extremely old Oloroso and a very old Pedro Jimenez as well, packed in half bottles. And we bottled at the end of September 600 half bottles of each, and they're about 200 euros per half bottle. And we were very concerned that people might not be in, or might be really hard to sell. And we're now in May, and probably 70% of the bottles have been sold already at these very high prices. We also collaborate very closely with Equipo Navazos, which some people might know. It's a group that selects very, very good wines from a few producers within Jerez, and also selling at very high prices to the finest restaurants in the world, the finest wine shops. And it's been a very successful collaboration. And I think people understand that today, or at least until now, high quality sherry has been severely underpriced, and you can still see it today. Some wines, especially finos from Jerez, that retail for well under 10 euros a bottle in Spain, regularly get very high marks. The most important wine guides in the world, and that should not be the case. Actually, in the Penin wine guide, the main guide for Spanish wines, this year, 80% of all the 140 sherries that were presented had more than 90 points, which is, way more than any other wine region in Spain. So, the experts all agree that, probably some of the very, very best wines in Spain are made in Jerez. But if you look at the average price of a bottle of sherry, we are, far away from, if you look at Riojas, Riberas, Priorats, with 95 points, they're probably 10 times more expensive than similar ranked sherry. So we still have work to do, and we have to believe in our category, and we should not be afraid to charge more money for our sherries. Volumes are declining, but cutting prices are not the way to go. It's making really good wines and charge for them. Not, we should still be a very good option for the consumer, getting a lot of value for his money. But still, we are still a category that offers an extremely high price quality ratio.
I'm super interested because you've really, without me sort of prompting or asking a question about it there, you've brought up really what I think for me is the key thing that keeps coming up time and time and time again, which is around sherry being undervalued. So often certainly in the UK wine trade, the UK wine trade knows that for our £10, they can get a wine that's way more complex than many others. I don't want you to give away all of your secrets, no. but I'm super interested about the €200 bottle, and I just invite you to say more on, I think, on two sides really. One is on the production side, what is actually in the bottle there that is commanding and achieving that price, and then secondly on the marketing. How are we? We've been told for so long that sherry is so underpriced and undervalued. So what is different in the marketing that again lets people be happy and feel like they're getting value for money when they pay the €200 rather than the 10?
Well, in the case of Fernando de Castilla, the singular wines, we're lucky that we have 2 small batches of wines that we purchased some years ago from. In one case, the singular Oloroso was purchased from an almacenista that closed down, and had some casks of extraordinary Oloroso, more than 80 years old. It's the finest sherry I've ever come across in my time in this business. And actually, my importer in the UK, he's a master of wine. When I sent him a sample, he said, Jan, this is the wine of my life, the best wine I've had in my life. And that is somebody who's been a master of wine for more than 20 years and has tasted absolutely all the worthwhile wines in the world. And, the people like the owner of Le Pin, one of the most expensive wines in the world, Pomerol in France, purchased 24 bottles for his private cellars because it's truly outstanding. And some other companies might use that wine to sort of, as you say, blend it into another wine and make a larger batch and make a really good sherry, but larger volumes. We just have a tiny volume, and we decided to bottle it as it is. No treatments, no cold stabilization, absolutely no fining, nothing. Just the wine as it's been sitting in the same barrel. The barrels that when I purchased this wine, it came in some very old barrels, and we kept the same barrels as well. So it's a unique wine, and the same thing with the singular Pedro Jimenez. It's a batch that was salvaged from one of the most famous companies in the industry that now no longer exist, and we were able to buy some of their finest Pedro Jimenez barrels, wine which is more than 60 years old, and it's also now in our sacristia, in our sort of holy corner of the cellars, and it's the same thing. It's incredibly concentrated, incredibly complex. It's something quite extraordinary. And again, we bottle it absolutely natural as it comes, and people think it's something very special, and I think we will use this sort of label of singular to every year, maybe one or two, numbered batches of, it might be an extraordinary Fino, it might be something else, but when we find something which is truly outstanding, we'll bring it to the market. Not necessarily very expensive. If it's not an extremely old wine, it doesn't need to be very expensive. But we want to create this little family of unique things from Fernando de Castilla, and sort of in the marketing thing, it's not really business. This is just something to show what we're able, the treasures that exist in Jerez and in Fernando de Castilla, and I think it helps, to make people think that even the lesser wines from Fernando de Castilla might be really good as well, which they are. So many people cannot afford the 200 euros for a half bottle of sherry. But they might go and buy our Antica Amontillado, which is 30 euros a bottle, and which is an extraordinary wine as well. So in a way, it makes our other wines look very affordable.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's super interesting about where the conversation has gone is really that high end product, the singular. It's essentially it's marketing itself, isn't it? Because it's that good, and people are, as you say, are writing those commentaries and buying. Let's almost then go to the complete other end of the spectrum, and I think talk about something that's important. It might get a bit meta because we're sitting here doing a podcast, which is in its own way digital communication media. How do you then, as a bodega, keeping that tradition and keeping those standards, how do you then communicate to what might be a younger audience and what might be a more dispersed audience, but using digital media in a way that is important to them and will resonate with them?
Well, as I said earlier, I think we're searching for our consumers, the pockets of consumers within different markets, and I think digital media is absolutely ideal for that. And I think we saw this very early on, and at one point, Fernando de Castilla was by far the company in the sherry trade with the most followers on Facebook and Twitter and everything. And I'm lucky to have on the team one person who's very good at these things. We also use digital media to do market our products, to get in touch with the potential consumers. So I think I told you maybe off the microphone. We didn't really spend any money on advertising, but we do actually spend a little bit on digital media, because I think it's such a good way to reach our consumers and make, like groups of followers, and which influence each other, and retweet and all these things. So I think it's very, very good. It's very, very cost effective. You get images in front of people, and it's a very good way to spread the word from one fan of your products to the next, because the consumers themselves help to market your product. So I think it's something we're active, and we're probably going to be more active. Instagram is one thing which is very good. We're not really too active at Instagram, and we need to sort of beef up that part. But definitely it's a great way to reach consumers and potential consumers, and we've got a lot of people that reach us through the digital media and wants to come and see us, and I think we receive people here every day, and what we really enjoy is to reach or receive people that are interested in products like the products of Fernando de Castilla, high quality sherry and brandy, and products with soul, personality, which at least we aim to make the highest possible quality within our market, in our sector.
To close, really, I'd just like to talk a little bit more, about marketing, but maybe then zooming out a little bit, and talking about the future of sherry. I guess as a category. I mean, I think one of the things that I've certainly heard a lot about is around, okay, how else do you get people to drink more of sherry? And I think two ways that really stand out are about talking about different food pairings and food matchings, and maybe searching for different types of food that do go with sherry. And then also on the cocktail side, where you've got a very unique flavor profile that in the hands of a mixologist can really bring a lot into a cocktail. And I'm just curious, just to kind of get a sense, do you think that there are sort of new ways, and you're sort of foreseeing new ways of essentially getting people to drink more and think more about sherry, or do you think those are going to be two ways that are going to be more important going forward, and that it's more about the channel by which you encourage people to do both those things, think about food pairings and think about cocktails?
Well, I think we talked about earlier the interesting fabulous food pairing of options with sherry, and we talked about the importance of sherry within the Spanish cuisine and all that. I think one thing we need to do now, and we're already starting, is to tell people that sherry is not only something for Spanish food. There's hardly any food in the world where you cannot make a good sherry pairing options, and I'm talking about things like essentially fine dining in general, and actually sherry, going back a few generations, it was always present in the finest, even French restaurants and fine dining establishments worldwide. And today we're really living an explosion in different kitchens. I'm talking about Peruvian food, ceviches with manzanilla or fino is just absolutely outstanding. Asian food, not the least. Fine Cantonese food. We've been collaborating with the Hakkasan group. Top end Cantonese food, and they've sold our sherry since they opened their first establishment, and virtually every Hakkasan group restaurant in the world carry Fernando de Castilla, Manzanilla, and Amontillado, And Amontillado is very good with special sort of Chinese, Cantonese dishes, things like sort of like pork bellies and things like that with Amontillado Oloroso. Japanese food, it's to me it's marvelous. If I have my sushi and we have a place in Jerez which makes fairly good sushi, I'll bring it home and I'll have some cold fino with sushi, sashimi. Basically, all Japanese food have some extraordinary combinations with sherry. So I think that's one way. And you mentioned cocktails. I think the cocktail thing is here and it's going to continue to develop. And what people don't remember, is that the first cocktail in the world and the only cocktail in the world for the last part of the 19th century was a sherry cobbler. Sherry with sugar and lemon and ice. I know that was the only cocktail you could find, and it was extraordinarily popular. It was so popular in England that somebody wanted to sort of prohibit it or whatever because it was bringing people into drinking. And when sherry was a very exclusive drink, bartenders used sherry in a lot of cocktails. When sherry lost its image, sherry was not used a lot in cocktails anymore. And, we're regaining our image again. And now bartenders are really interested in sherry. I did an event in Ireland recently at the Westbury Hotel in Dublin. And they have a cocktail bar, which is extraordinary. And they have more than 50 sherry cocktails on their list. And you see more and more sherry cocktails. You see it a lot in the US. I think it's helped by our industry. We've had the sherry cocktail competition going in the US for quite some time, more than 10 years, which is drawing a lot of attention from top bartenders, and I think sherry has sort of like a flavor enhancing capacity. People talk about umami, produced by the floor yeasts. And I think in some cocktails, one thing I really enjoy is like a Bloody Mary with Fino or Amontillado. It's actually a much better drink than a Bloody Mary made with vodka, which is actually just dilutes everything and gives alcohol, but absolutely no flavor. So I would recommend anyone to try Bloody Mary made with Fino instead of vodka. And people say, I cannot state it's true but apparently when the drink Bloody Mary was created, they started first using sherry, and then it became vodka Bloody Mary in the 1960s when vodka became popular. But I don't really know. What I know is that it tastes a lot better with sherry than with vodka. So I think those two ways, sort of using sherry with different types of food. And using sherry in cocktails is two good ways to go. And also by promoting sherry with cocktails, it also brings people closer to the category. They might be more likely to say, well, this tastes really good. Sherry must be something good. Let's have sherry as well. So.
Thank you so much, Jan. It was an absolute pleasure sitting down with you. And thank you so much for sharing the approach of Fernando de Castilla. Refreshing for sherry that they're able to command premium and ultra-premium pricing. Do see below for Fernando de Castilla website and main social media handles. And while you're at it, why not give me a follow on social media? I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook. At Wine Podcast on Twitter. And email hello@interpretingwine.com. Next time on the Sherry Week series in episode 327, We are taken on a guided tour of Bodegas Osborne in El Puerto de Santa Maria. See you then.